Hello, and welcome to the Urban Classroom. Hi, I'm Mrs. Briggs, and thank you for joining me today in the Urban Classroom. Today's lesson is about manifest destiny, westward expansion, and conflict with Mexico. There's a lot happening in this unit, so let's get started. When I say manifest destiny, I'm talking about a concept. It is a concept where people in America believe that they had a God-given right to own all of the land and to control the land from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. Now, there was a reason why the Americans wanted to control this land. They felt that they needed to spread Christianity, which is a religion, and they also believed that they needed to expand their Western culture and also to expand democracy and to practice democracy where people vote and they elect their leaders and the majority rule. So this concept of manifest destiny, it made America continue to move west. American leaders continued to gain more and more land that was to the west. But unfortunately, that land belonged to somebody already. Britain had land in the west, Mexico had land in the west, and don't forget that indigenous people were also in the west. Americans have always wanted more and more land, all the way back from the 13 colonies. You remember after the French and Indian War, there was land that was to the west of the Appalachian Mountains, and the colonists, they wanted that area, and they were able to get that area after fighting the American Revolutionary War, where they got independence from Great Britain. So we're continuing to move west. Jefferson has the area that he bought that is known as the Louisiana Purchase, but there's still more land available. So this pioneer spirit has always been within Americans, where people have been willing to risk their lives to go to places that were unsettled and places that were very dangerous. But they wanted to have a better life. They wanted more opportunity. So they were willing to just pack up the family and get into those covered wagons and take dangerous trips, long trips across the West to get to new area and to get to new land that needed to be settled. Now, the Hudson River School is located in New York City. And at this school, you have artists who are painting these majestic and romantic landscapes. I mean, the pictures are just absolutely beautiful. It looks like you don't see actual people, but you see the landscape. And this idea of the beautiful and majestic landscape was captured by the Hudson River School. The government will use artwork from this school to promote westward expansion, moving west. So pictures like this could make a person imagine that they can have a little cabin in the woods in an area that was beautiful like this next to a lake where you can have natural resources. So this idea of enjoying nature and being a part of nature and having land and having your own home, this idea is very successful in convincing other people to move west because the land is available, but you got to get the people into the area. And so the Hudson River School, their artwork was used by the government to help promote the idea of people moving west. There's a man that we should know about. His name is John James Audubon. I like to call him the Birdman, but he's really America's woodsman because he was a person who liked to go out into nature and he'd draw the different wildlife that he would see. Now, he's mostly known for drawing large scale portrait size of birds. And he was able to really just help Americans understand what kind of wildlife was in the West based on his drawings. We were able to learn a lot about nature and the natural habitat in the West. So these paintings and these drawings, I mean, they're large, like the size of the window in your living room or in your bedroom. It's that large of a picture. But thanks to John James Audubon, we're able to learn about wildlife and what was seen in the West. Now I want to talk to you about Tejas. Tejas belonged to Mexico, and this area was very vast. There was a lot of land available, but unfortunately, there weren't a lot of people there to settle the land. There wasn't a lot of people to farm the land. So to solve the problem, the Mexicans, they decided to invite white settlers to come into Tejas. Now there were some conditions. If you were going to come to this new land, to this country, because it's a different country, it wasn't a part of the United States, Tejas belonged to Mexico. And the Mexicans said, if you come, we will give you land. We will share this land with you, but you have to agree to become a Mexican citizen. And you also have to agree to become a Catholic, which is a different religion from most of the Christians Americans that were um, mostly living in the southern part of the United States. So people left their home in the South and different parts of the country and decided to go to Tejas to live and become citizens and to practice Catholic religion and just try to live a life because there were more opportunities available to have land. And remember the pioneer spirit about Americans wanting land and valuing land. So a lot of white settlers went over to Spanish Tejas. Now, when Americans went over to Tejas, a little problem happened. The problem was that more and more Americans kept coming over to Tejas. Well, there's a reason why more and more people start coming over because gold was discovered. And if you found gold or a significant amount of gold, you could become rich. So, of course, if one person found out, then the news got around and more people were coming and more people were coming. It got pretty bad, though. It got bad where the Mexican government had to say, okay, that's it. We can't have any more immigration. We cannot let any more settlers. No more Americans can come into Tejas because it's too many people at this time. So the Americans didn't like this. They did not want to stop coming to Tejas. They wanted the land, they wanted the gold, and so Americans kept coming over. A lot of them came over illegally. Now, this created a lot of tension between the Mexican government and the Americans who were coming over. There is going to be a fight that happened, and because the white settlers who called themselves the Texans, they took control over a place called San Antonio. Well, this created a lot of problem, and a fighting will happen, and Texans will declare their independence from Mexico. So it's not the American government. It's just a few Americans went over to Tejas and took that area from Mexico after gold was discovered and after so much land was available and fighting happened. But again, remember, it's not the United States of America that it was fighting. It was settlers, white settlers who were fighting, and they wanted to get their independence from Mexico. So that is the revolution. Revolution means a sudden change, but it's usually done through violence. And so there was a lot of violence in Texas. The Texans will win their fight. They are fighting against one of the most famous generals in Mexican history. His name is General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, and he fought, and unfortunately a lot of people were killed on both sides, the Mexicans as well as Americans, those settlers, the white settlers who went over to Mexico. They were fighting in places like San Jacinto, and also there's fighting in Goliad. Now, you may remember from seventh grade about the Alamo, where a lot of men were killed. Maybe, maybe you know some names: David Crockett, Bowie. They were killed at the Alamo, and the battle cry to inspire other Texans to fight was "Remember the Alamo." Well, unfortunately, this fighting will lead to a lot of people getting killed. A treaty will be signed, though. The treaty will be called the Treaty of Velasco. And Santa Anna signs this treaty to be released because he was captured. It also will end the war, and it will remove Mexican soldiers from the area and return the prisoners that were on both sides. So again, remember that Mexico invited white settlers to come to Tejas, but the Americans wanted that land because of the discovery of gold. And so fighting happened, and then a treaty will be signed, and Mexico will give Texas to the Americans. And that was part of Texas independence. Now, when Texas gets its independence, Texas wants to join the United States of America. Okay, remember, Texas belonged to Mexico, but the white settlers fought and declared their independence from Mexico. Now they want to be added into the United States of America. Well, here's the problem. In Mexico, there was slavery, and in Tejas, there was slavery. So the president at the time, his name was Martin Van Buren, he doesn't like the idea of allowing Texas to join the Union, because Texas will become a slave state and will use slave labor. Well, this is creating a problem, and there's already had been a lot of problems in the United States over slave states and free states. So after thinking about should Texas be allowed to join the Union, the president and Congress said no. Texas had to remain an independent republic. So Texas is like its own country, and they have to set up their own government. They have to get their own military. They have to set up their own president, and their president will be a man named Sam Houston. If you're familiar with the state of Texas, you know that that Houston is very popular, and um, it's a very highly populated area in an urban part of Texas, the city called Houston. So Sam Houston, he is the president of the Republic of Texas, and they will remain an independent nation. They're like their own country for about 7 years. 7 years, Texas was on their own. That's why when you look at the Texas flag, you'll see just one star. They were considered the Lone Star Republic, or the Lone Star State. Just one star, because they were by themselves and had their own government set up for about 7 years because they couldn't join the United States. Now I want to talk to you about the annexation of Texas, but you need to know what the annexation is. That word annexation or annex means to join a group, to add. So Texas is going to be added to the United States. But remember, 7 years had passed. The annexation of Texas happens in the year 1845. You see, the United States was concerned about Texas remaining independent. They hadn't been independent, for quite some time. But now America realizes, the United States realizes that if we don't add Texas into the United States, then they're going to block us and we won't be able to continue to move west. And remember, the idea of manifest destiny is to control all the land from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, but Texas is in the way. So now the government says, okay, we're going to add you into the United States of America, and Texas will be added as a slave state. So slavery will be allowed in Texas, and Texas will become the 28th state in the United States of America. And that year is 1845. 1845 is one of the very important dates that you'll need to know for 8th grade U.S. history, because it is about the annexation of Texas. That's when Texas was added into the United States officially. Now, once Texas is added into the United States, here comes another problem. This was the problem that the president was afraid of. Van Buren was afraid that if Texas was added to the United States, then Mexico was going to get upset and then it could start a war between two countries. Because remember, Texas got their independence, but they were just settlers, just a group of Americans. But now the problem has escalated where it's between the country of Mexico and the country of the United States. The argument is about the border. Where is the border of Texas? Well, if you look at this map, Mexico said the area that they were willing to give up was inside that red circle. The borders of Texas went up to the Nueces River. Well, the Americans said, nope, 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 no, no. You got it twisted. Texas goes all the way to the Rio Grande River. That's all the space inside the black circle. Well, that's a big difference. Mexico only wanted to give up the area inside the red circle, but the United States says, no, we want all the area inside that black circle up to the Rio Grande River. So now we are at war. The year is 1846. This war will last for 2 years. It is a fight about the border. Where is the border of Texas? Well, after much fighting, a treaty is going to be signed. Remember, to end a war, you must have a treaty. That treaty will be the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. That is where official paperwork was signed to end the U.S. and the Mexican War. And if you're familiar with the outline and the borders of Texas, you will see that the Americans were able to get everything inside that black circle, which is up to the Rio Grande River. Now, everybody did not like this U.S.-Mexican border war. People in the North, they said, they don't like the war. They opposed the war. And they thought that the United States just picked a fight with Mexico just to get Mexico land. And they said, you're wrong for that. That's dirty. Why would you start a fight with somebody and then just try to take what belongs to them? And a lot of people in the North, they said, it's not fair that Texas is using slavery because they get an unfair economic system when it comes to trade. Because if you use slavery, you don't have to pay the enslaved people to work. The owners keep that money. And the people in the North thought that was not fair. Now, in the South, they said they supported the war. A lot of people supported the war because it gave them more land. And if you have more land, then you could get more slaves. And if you got more slaves, you can have more cash crops, and that will give you more money. And remember, with slave labor, you don't pay your slaves to work. So people had different opinions about this U.S. Mexican war. Some people felt that it wasn't fair. They didn't like the outcome of the war. But some people said, yeah, they did like the outcome of this war. Two different sides. Now I want to talk to you about civil disobedience. We got to see, what does it mean, civil disobedience? If we break the word down, you will see that civil means people, dis means not, obedience is to obey. So civil disobedience is about people not obeying. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. This ties into a man named Henry David Thoreau. See, Henry David Thoreau, he was one of the people who said it's wrong for America to pick the fight with Mexico and then take their land. So Henry David Thoreau, he believed that you have to use nonviolence. You can't just talk about justice. You have to back your words up with actions. So Henry David Thoreau, he said, I'm not going to pay my taxes because I don't want my taxes to be used to fund and support a war against Mexico. So he was refusing to pay a certain tax, and he was put into jail for that. He was put in jail, but he only stayed one night because I believe a friend of his or someone he knew paid the fee for him, and he was able to get out. But the point is that he believed in civil disobedience. He even wrote a book about it. He wrote essays about it. It was called On the Duty of Civil Disobedience. He believed that talk was not enough. You have to do actions. If you see something that is wrong in the government, then you have to speak about it, but you also have to have actions. And he spoke up against the U.S. Mexican war that was over the border of Texas. So that's Henry David Thoreau, and he talks a lot about civil disobedience. You may be familiar with some acts of civil disobedience. I just wanted to share a few with you. You may know about Rosa Parks and refusing to get off the bus. Well, that was an act of civil disobedience when she wouldn't move to the back of the bus. You might know about Cesar Chavez and how he helped the farm workers to demand better pay and more rights in mostly in parts of California. I'm from California, and we learned a lot when I was younger about Cesar Chavez. You may know about Dr. King and Dr. King fighting for civil rights in the 1950s and 60s, late 50s and mid 60s. He was protesting. He was using nonviolence, and that was an act of civil disobedience. Maybe you know about Gandhi from India, because India used to be under the control of Great Britain, and people were not treated fairly, not treated um, or given all of their rights. And so Gandhi, he spoke up for his people and demanded civil rights for Indians. Now, I'm not talking about Native Americans. I'm talking about Indians, people who live in India. Maybe you know about Nelson Mandela. He fought for civil rights and voting rights for his people in South Africa. South Africa is a country. There are about 54 different countries, I believe, in Africa, and one of those countries is South Africa. Well, Nelson Mandela was in prison. Oh my goodness, how many years? It's got to be over 25 years for speaking up and demanding rights for his people in South Africa. Later on, he will be released from prison after a lot of pressure is placed on South Africa, and also he becomes the president of South Africa. So if you're not familiar with him or some of these other people that I spoke about, do a search, learn more about Dr. King, Cesar Chavez, Rosa Parks, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela. But in eighth grade U.S. history, probably the most famous act of civil disobedience that you've learned about is the Boston Tea Party, when the colonists were very upset at King George III and Parliament. So to hurt King George III in Parliament, they threw the tea into the Boston Harbor, and that cost a lot of money. A lot of money was wasted, but it was an act of civil disobedience. All right, let's continue. Here's another vocabulary word that you'll need to know: cession. Cession means to give up, to forfeit. If you play sports, you probably know about cession. If another team doesn't show up, then they forfeit the game, or they end up losing. So let's see how this relates to history. During a time where the U.S.-Mexican War was happening, um, you're going to have gold being discovered in California. It's going to be a gold rush. Well, the Americans living in California, and they decided that they too want to declare their independence from Mexico. And so soldiers are sent, U.S. soldiers are sent over to Mexico to fight. Now, Mexico is not going to win. Unfortunately, they just finished all this fighting in Texas, and now there's another problem in California. Well, the Mexicans decided we can't continue like this. Too many women are losing their husbands, they're losing their sons. It's too much problems, it's too much death, and so Mexico will secede. They will give up this land. They will cede their land to the United States. A large amount of land will be given up to the United States. That land today includes California, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, parts of Wyoming, and also New Mexico. This area, if you look at the map, there's a black arrow pointing to this area, this territory, and that will be called the Mexican Cession. It is the land that was given up when the Americans wanted to continue to fight Mexico. The treaty that was signed was the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And remember, and when you sign a treaty, there are terms, there are conditions, um, and they're put in writing. And the person who wins the war gets to make a lot of demands. And so this was part of the demand that the United States made, is to receive all that land um, from Mexico. So Mexico lost a lot of land to the United States by fighting the war. There's another area of land or territory of land that's available. It's called the Oregon Territory. Now, this area belonged to Great Britain, and the Americans and Britain, they have been talking about dividing this area, but the Americans wanted to fight over this area, but an agreement was made, and Great Britain decided to sell this land to the Americans, to the United States. Now, this area will have a lot of people traveling. They got to go past the Rocky Mountains, and that's very dangerous. Um, they traveled along what was called the Oregon Trail. Well, during that travel to get to the Oregon Territory, you're going to have about 20,000 people die trying to get there. And is just a rough area to travel through. You have deserts, you have rivers, mountains to go over. Also, there are indigenous people in that area that don't like the fact that they're losing a lot of land. And so it was very hard to get into that area into the west, and it was hard to settle it. Some people will stay in the Oregon Territory, but then some people will move on to California. But the Oregon Territory, originally it belonged to Britain, but America will purchase it. They'll negotiate. All right, I mentioned a little bit before that there will be a gold rush in California, and you're going to have so many people flock to California. And those people were called the 49ers because they started arriving in California in the year 1849. If you know anything about sports, you probably heard about the San Francisco 49ers. Well, that's where they got their name from, the 49ers. These people who were going into California looking for gold, hoping to strike it rich, hoping to make a lot of money. But a lot of people did not. They suffered a lot, and unfortunately, business owners really took advantage of the situation. They start raising the prices on a lot of the supplies and the provisions that were in the area. This area became very dangerous. It was kind of wild. You had just lawlessness. You know, people were losing their lives. It's just a hard life to live if you're in an area that has not really been settled yet. You don't have the convenience of an urban area or a big city area where you have a lot of transportation systems or um, grocery stores, businesses. It wasn't like that in California. They had to slowly build and expand the area. So California gold rush, you're going to have a lot of people coming over to look for gold. And oh, by the way, also Chinese. A lot of Chinese people will go to California looking for gold. And unfortunately, a lot of them will not find gold and strike it rich. But they will get a job later on working on the Transcontinental Railroad. But I'll talk about that later in the next unit. Now, the last piece of land that you'll need to know about is the Gadsden Purchase. Do you see it? It's right below Arizona. If you look on the map, right below Arizona and New Mexico. Well, Gaston was the name of the political leader who did the negotiation to buy this small slice of land, and we will buy it from Mexico for the price of $10 million. Now, this little piece of land is very important because the goal is to connect the east to the west with the train system, because the East Coast had already established train systems, but the West not really. So this is going to be a way to provide a link between the West Coast and those railroads that are in the South that lead up to the North. So with the Gaston Purchase, America had purchased their final piece of land that they needed, and that was called the Gaston Purchase. So the mission is accomplished. The American government owned all the land from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. So when we talk about how America became America by gaining pieces of land, territories. And it took an enormous amount of time to get all of those pieces of land. Think of it like a puzzle, like doing a puzzle. You get piece by piece, but you put it all together and you have the continental United States of America. So some of the land we fought for it, like the 13 colonies and the area that is known as the Treaty of Paris. But we also bought land, like the purchase of Florida, the Louisiana Territory, the Gaston Purchase, and again more fighting through war, and that was the U.S. Mexican War. But we also did some negotiating with Great Britain. And then you see the Mexican Cession where that land was taken away from Mexico. So a lot of countries had land in the New World, but after the Gaston Purchase, America, the United States will own all of this land from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, the continental U.S. Now, the person who helped America get so much of that land was President number 11, and his name was James Polk. James Polk was involved in the Oregon Treaty, getting that territory of land from Great Britain and negotiating. He was also responsible or was in office during the Mexican Cession as well as during the annexation of Texas. So we give him credit for helping America get like a third of the land mass that we have today. And that was President James Polk. Now that America had more and more land, you're going to start seeing a lot of more people traveling to the West. And one group in particular is the Mormons. The Mormons were a religious group, and they still exist today. They started off in upstate New York, and their leader was a man named Joseph Smith. Now, the problem that other Americans had with this religious group is that they believed in polygamy and they practice it. Polygamy means that a man has a lot of wives. He it's part of the religion that they practice. So one man can have 3 wives or 5 wives or 20 wives. And the religion was not accepted by other people. See, that he enjoyed his religion and his family enjoyed the religion and was helpful for them, but other people did not like the idea of polygamy. And so the Mormons were told to leave several different states because of polygamy. Now, in 1847, you're going to get a new leader. His name is Brigham Young. And by the way, there's a Brigham Young University is one of the most prestigious universities that we have in the United States today. But the man named Brigham Young, he decided to move the people of his church, of his religion, to Utah. And they went to Utah because a lot of Americans did not want to go to Utah because that area was very barren. It was hard to get anything to grow in that area. So the Mormons, they did travel along the Pioneer Trail, and they're very creative people. They found ways to create irrigation system that brought water from mountains, and they were able to grow crops, and they were able to survive, and they were able to flourish, and they did very well for themselves. And so the people of the Mormon community, they wanted to become a part of the United States. They wanted Utah to be a state, but the American government wasn't willing to allow the Mormons to make Utah a state because of polygamy. And so the United States says once you decide to give up polygamy, then you can be added as a state. So finally, in the year 1896, the group, the Mormons, they decided that they would not practice polygamy anymore, where a man would not be allowed to legally marry a lot of women and have them as sister wives. I don't know if you watch television, but they have a show now called Sister Wives, and it's based on the people who are very familiar with the Mormon community, and they practice where polygamy was once practiced. But in 1896, Utah becomes the 45th state in the United States of America. And Mormons, they still are very active today in society in Utah. And they're They don't practice the polygamy though anymore. All right, so we've come to the end of our lesson for today. We learned about manifest destiny, westward expansion, and conflict with Mexico. So I want to thank you for joining me today in the urban classroom. This is where we're learning about U.S. history from the 13 original English colonies to settling the western frontier after the Civil War and Reconstruction. Be sure to watch the next video as we continue to learn more about U.S. history. I want you to have a great day, and why don't you just make it a great day? Bye.